Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, and welcome back to the Karma Koala podcast, another episode. And on this episode, we've got Dr. Z from it's ECS Wellness, isn't it, Dr. Z?
Yes, sir.
And the reason I'm talking to Dr. Z is because medical cannabis, to me, has been sidelined a bit in the US discussion. And I'm sort of interested to know from a company that calls itself a medical cannabis company, what is happening in the US, how they view stuff, and how they view the legislation that's been created in various states around the country. Does it help them progress the cause of medical cannabis over all the other options that are available for consumers in the US? Dr. Z, welcome to the show. Firstly, a little bit of background about yourself and what brought you to medical cannabis. Did you qualify as a practicing doctor in the first place?
Well, thank you for having me. I've been interested in integrative medicine or holistic medicine for a while. I'm a musician, developed a repetitive stress injury, and that got me on the path to kind of better understanding health and healing from a body, mind, spirit perspective. And so I'm a conventionally trained MD, but I also have a lot of other training in other disciplines: functional medicine, mind body medicine, nutrition, and really the way that I came to medical marijuana or medical cannabis was just kind of looking at frankly, in 2014, couple of buddies and I were just looking into the industry and looking for at a possible career change. The green rush was kind of happening, and it was very exciting. And along that journey, as I started learning about medical marijuana, I learned about the endocannabinoid system. And that's really that's it. We're really more ECS specialists. And so that changed everything, because I didn't learn about the ECS in medical school. And learning about,
I presume nobody learned about ECS in medical school, did they?
Not when I was in medical school. I mean, so to clarify, right? So the ECS is the endocannabinoid system. It's the system the way that our nervous system. So our nervous system regulates our existence, and this is how the nervous system regulates itself. So in response to mild stressors, internal and external, we create our own cannabinoids. We synthesize on demand our own cannabinoids. Learning about this, you learn that the ECS is largely responsible for the mnemonic that I use as memory maps for memory, mood, appetite, pain, and sleep, right? But it's really regulating anything that the nervous system is regulating, which is everything. But we have to simplify it. So we synthesize these cannabinoids on demand, and often the cannabinoids that we create ourselves are not enough to manage the modern world that we're in. So we have to engage in activities that produce more of them, or we need to supplement the system. And in order to supplement the system, we use phyto from plants, phytocannabinoids. And in comes medical marijuana. So it's kind of like the way that I fell into this really was just being interested in integrative medicine, having just an open mind to kind of understanding that there were elements and components of health and healing that we just simply don't really have a grasp on, and investigating this kind of burgeoning industry. And so I'll just kind of just finish this little bit by saying, to me, finding out about the ECS was honestly, it was seeing a sunset for the first time, or finding out that there are did you know that there are bodies of water called oceans? It's what? If you understood, if you lived on Earth and you had no idea that there were oceans, it was holy cow, that explains everything. And so to me, it offered an explanation for a lot of missing pieces that really weren't making sense to me. If you look at conditions that are a result of a deficiency in cannabinoids like fibromyalgia, clinical endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome, fibromyalgia, IBS, migraines, these are conditions that are very difficult to treat in Western medicine. I don't want to veer too far off the path, but it's the ECS and ECS medicine. And in order to supplement the ECS, we need phytocannabinoids. And the plant that has all the phytocannabinoids
It's the
is
cannabis.
cannabis.
So,
And
I
so
mean,
now we have medical marijuana.
you started sort of looking into this in the early 2010s or something. Are you a West Coast guy?
I'm not. I'm East Coast. So 2014 I started looking into it, and I'm from New York, born and raised.
What interests me at this stage is California had already had some sort of gray system in place for, let's say,
Right.
15 years, 2000, onwards. And so there was a sort of basic understanding of what medical marijuana was, but it was a lot more gray than white or black, basically. And then legislators started creating regulations around the country with little or no knowledge about what medical cannabis is, well, was or is. How do you, as a doctor and other people in your profession, see how this system has been created alongside running? Firstly, this is how a state runs. We will regulate cannabis. The safest and easiest way for a politician to do so is call it medical, even though we don't actually know what that means. That opens the door for people to use cannabis either as a medical product, a holistic product, or adult use product, whatever the politicians say that the system they've created. I'm really interested as a medical professional and how other medical professionals think about the way that this process has been developed. And we're now up to, I think, 42 states in the US. And of course, all the other stuff then follows. So it's all very muddled. And the definition, so in countries like Australia, or which is a faux adult use market anyway, but they've really tried, in Europe and the UK, they've really tried to concentrate on this concept of medical cannabis and nothing else, even though they don't know what it is. The US has just thrown everything in the pot and said, this is, excuse the pun, this is what it is. How are you guys going to unravel all that and actually create these channels so the medical profession can, under law, prescribe specific products or
Right.
whatever for certain things? Do you see what I'm trying to get to?
100%. Yes. Yes. So the way to trace it, right, and how it's driven by capitalism. Um,
That leads every conversation I'm having at the moment.
Right. And so if you think about what happened is in 1996 in California, they passed the first medical marijuana bill in the United States. And what happened was you had you developed, it's all about, this is the problem.
You
Cert
developed an
mills
industry.
of cert mills,
Yeah.
and the industry was built around, so an industry, a cannabis industry, but it was like, but the medical cannabis industry and the medical marijuana side, there was an opportunity to make money by selling access to patients. And that's the problem. I mean, that's like the fundamental problem. And so if you take that for a moment and you put a pin in it as really like a model that, a strange model of just selling access to product but not care, right? That's the fundamental issue. So now for our practice, we come to it, it's interesting. So I look at it this way. It used to be that now, we used to think about it as integrative medicine, we're holistic medicine, right? This is the way that I look at how cannabis fits into our. I mean, our model is for ECS wellness, so it's either cannabinoid production through activities that stimulate the ECS and like exercise, i.e., the runner's high, meditation, yoga, social connection, or phytocannabinoid supplementation. And so that's the model that we have. And we're trying to just create this model of ECS wellness. But if you look at us for a moment as an integrative medicine practice, then you might say that we also practice plant medicine. And there's this kind of subspecialty of plant medicine called cannabis therapeutics, right? But within that, what you're referring to is this notion that cannabis therapeutics, that a specialist in cannabis therapeutics understands dosing structure. They understand the products. They understand how to make specific recommendations. They understand the art of cannabis therapeutics. And therefore, when patients come to them, right, they're able to give them specific recommendations. That is, so how, what are we doing? We're doing that. Like, I think for us, we're basically just towing this line of a subspecialty where it fits in with what we do. I think that what's going to have to happen is, in a state that has both adult use and medical marijuana, what we've seen is what is the card at? What there's like two reasons to get a card right now, right? So people can get a card and they can save the 20% sales tax that they would pay in adult use. And so people pay for that and they go to a provider and they pay them and they get their card. The other reason, though, and the other reason to get it is the reason to see us is not necessarily to have or to see a specialist, is not really to get the card. It's to understand how to best use cannabis to treat the conditions that are best treated with cannabis. This is a very long-winded explanation, but it's like my answer is to do what we've done, which is honestly, we sit within the Harvard medical system, and we're an affiliate of Mass General Brigham system, and we practice medicine. What we've seen is, I mean, that's the difference. The cert mills, they're not really treating the patients. They're not really treating conditions. What they're doing is they are following the regulations. And this is kind of gets back to like when you were looking at law and regulation, right?
This is what I'm driving to, is how, you've got the medical profession, which by its nature is quite conservative and is set up by specialities. And
right.
Cannabis sort of throws a confusion ball into that, because it's suddenly saying it's an area of medicine that deals holistically with a whole range of issues within the human body,
right.
And it doesn't slice and dice. And then you've got to then at the same time you've got to deal with that conservative element, and then the element of the politicians and the regulators who have no understanding of cannabis, never mind cannabis as a medical solution for certain problems.
Right.
And you got to bring those two together to somehow create some sort of way of incorporating cannabis into standard medical practice within the US system. Do we have to wait for federal law, or can it happen under all the various state systems? It seems so complicated and convoluted. I'm not sure where to start. And that's why I was interested to speak to you guys, just to see, what the conversation is amongst the general medical profession and the cannabis medical profession about, you can't undo everything that's been done, but at some point something huge has to change, doesn't it?
Well, right. And what's happening now, it's like so if you think about a state that had, so when we had medical marijuana only, and there was a very different attitude until until adult use came to light. Now that adult use comes to light, my physician colleagues, the fact of the matter is your patients have access. It's an over-the-counter medicine. So there's a little bit where capitalism has kind of like pushed it to me. So I don't discern between medical. There really is no medical marijuana. I mean, there's no, or adult use. It's people, even people that are using it for adult use, they're using it. I mean, sure, you could look at it as the fundamental is adult use is focusing on the intoxicating feeling is the touch point of kind of
It is, but
relief. It's
as we know, it's far more complicated, because if you're 18 and want to get intoxicated, that's completely different if you're 28, 35, 45, 55, 85.
right, right. And so, but the fact of the matter is, though, is that physician providers, not just physicians, providers, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, now with adult use, if they're 18 and older, now their ethical obligation has changed, right? So you can't necessarily tell your patient if your patient wants to try. So now what happens if your patient wants to try it for sleep?
Yeah.
And you're a primary care physician and your patient comes to you and they say, I don't know, I kind of like, I don't really want to try Ambien or medications. I can't sleep. I want to try cannabis. I've heard about cannabis. I don't want to smoke it. What do I do? And so it becomes now that's one step closer, because at this point, they don't need a provider. They don't need their PCP's approval. You know what I mean? They can go to the bud tender and ask
And
the
just
bud
try
tender
5 different things until they find the right one,
until they find the right thing.
anybody who's operated in the illegal market for 30 or 40 years of their life knows only too well.
Right, exactly. And so I think that, I think that there's, part of it is it's just going to be, is it going to be something major happen, or is it just over the test of time that people just become that much more comfortable with
more
it?
peer research, with more knowledge, with more prescribing for certain things? It'll just be integrated slowly into standard medicine, and regulation will play less of a part. But that's a 50-year process.
You know what? It depends. Look, we're like our part. And it's not really. It's hard not to. I'm promoting our. Obviously, this is self. It's always kind of self promotion. We're all promoting our, our ourselves in our own ways. But we're working hard to develop specialists that can make recommendations and develop our own protocols and train people. I think, out there, at what we see on the front lines, we do see PCPs that are more and more comfortable with it, or we do see some providers, that are, feeling a little bit more comfortable making initial recommendations. I would say over the next decade, it should shake itself out. And I believe that, the big question is whether or not it's the Controlled Substances Act will be modified, and whether or not it will be rescheduled. I don't think it will be descheduled. But you
Not
can't.
anytime soon, as far as I can see.
No. Look at alcohol, right? You can compare them and you can compare them, but alcohol has medicinal properties, right? It's a very, very, very challenging medicine to use medicinally because it is toxic, and because of the intoxication at such a small amount. I think but when you compare it, you're talking about a medicine that's an intoxicant. And I think it's a bit of a phenomenon. You know what I mean? I think it's I think it's a bit of a,
Well, this sort of leads me to my next question. Yeah, medical cannabis, which obviously some industrial produced cannabis has far too high THC levels, and that's another discussion. But it seems to me that most people in the political and regulatory side of things seem far more enthused by psychedelic compounds as medicine than they do as cannabis. And as somebody who's used both, I'd be far more wary of the psychedelics. But there seems to be this all-in rush. Maybe it's just money again, but it seems to be this all-in rush for psychedelics when which I don't want to stop people slowly investigating it, but at the same time,
right.
with our experience of cannabis already and our knowledge of cannabis, shouldn't we be going forward with that and running psychedelics down the side as we learn more about cannabis? But at the moment, there seems to be this headlong rush into, it's like the panacea for everything, which I suppose in a way that's how they thought about cannabis in 1995. But it's
Right.
not, and it can be far. Nobody seems to be want to sort of raise the awareness of the possibilities of the dangers of all these different psychedelic compounds suddenly being pumped into people all over the place.
Right. Right. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a couple of things to comment on the right. We're always looking for the silver bullet, right? And is the silver bullet the panacea? Are those the same things? I don't think they
But that's
are.
what
I
cannabis
think that
teaches us, isn't it? That there isn't a silver bullet, it's a holistic approach. Correct?
right, and it's also because cannabis is treating a physiological system. It's treating the ECS. It's balancing a system that balances our nervous system, and our nervous system is what's responsible for our life experience, our own perception, right? So because it goes right to that source, I think that it's almost like it got moved into the limelight as like, is this the silver bullet panacea? And it's like, wow, it has a lot of those properties. Wow. I think that people are excited, got very excited about it. 95 through 2015, 2000, right, 2020. And I think that now it's not as sexy, it's not as exciting, but I think that it's growing roots while that's happening. And it might not have all the pretty flowers per se, or that might not be the distraction, but I think it is getting roots. And I think it's, as the baby boomer generation are getting older and more comfortable with it, what we're seeing is the stigma is starting to is really like just slowly
Leveling.
is leveling. And I think as that happens, the psychedelics are a nice distraction. I could not agree with you more. I think it's a potential disaster waiting to happen. I mean, you're opening doors in the unconscious that are under lock
There's
and
plenty of
key.
20th century novelists who wrote very good books about this.
Right,
You,
right, right,
you
right.
only have to read 3 or 4 of them to realize that, you've really got to be a little bit more careful than we are at the moment.
Right. See, it's almost like, I mean, I guess it's almost like people are looking at it as, it's not that they're looking at psychedelics as the silver bullet, where cannabis was like treated more like a panacea. And in some ways, it is because it makes you feel comfortable and can touch upon so many things. I think that I look at the two as being very different, and I hear what you're saying, and that it's like, yeah, it seems like all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, psychedelics, okay, and they leaving cannabis. To me, I think look at that as a good thing, because I'm like, you know what?
Just
Part
let
of
us
me is
get
like,
on with
aren't
it
we?
quietly. Let us.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, aren't isn't this a good enough win? I'm like, all right, if you're all not interested, we're not done here. I would tell you. So this is interesting. When we go, so we're one of the only people in the state. We're probably one of the only people. I mean, definitely in the country, and who knows how many specialists actually know and are really making recommendations for products, how to use it, how to dose it, having their patients come back in a week or 2 weeks and making adjustments and adding different cannabinoids. I mean, that is what we do. And so, but we don't make our own products as of now. We will at some point because we honestly, it's become necessary because the products in the medical market are none of them are a result of providers recommending it. That is insane. That'd be like selling drugs that no physicians developed. So when you look at these lists of products, you look at tinctures and in some of the
No, but I
tinctures
mean,
that we
I've
did
I've
use.
spotted this in the Australian market is Canadians who have got oversupply of adult use cannabis just rebrand it and say it's medical, send it to Australia, and then
Right,
some guy prescribes it out because he gets paid $350 an hour to do so, and then the
right.
consumer takes it because it says on the label that it's medical cannabis, but actually on the other side of the Pacific, it was adult use cannabis.
Right, and then I mean there is no necessarily there's not, as I mentioned. I mean the products are the same. So I'll give you an example. I was looking at a dispensary that was the closest medical dispensary to the patient that I was seeing virtually the other day, and I wanted to make a recommendation for tinctures because those are in a liquid form and you can really dose them. You can
Yeah.
microdose it and you can titrate the dose well. And it's like the only tinctures that were available was this brand that is like a sugary syrup that you can add to drink, and it's like it's this stuff is it's. I
Well,
mean,
it's kids. It's product for kids, but kids aren't allowed to have it.
right. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, that's the whole other thing too. Why do you have to
Yeah,
have like things
but
in the
I tell
shape
you,
of gummy bears and
we
all
can have
that?
another 5 hour
Right.
discussion about that one.
Right. But it's, it's interesting. I mean, to witness an industry, a medical industry that has developed from like bud tender recommendations rather than providers. I mean, I don't know, the answer is again, our answer is like we feel like we have an answer, and we're just kind of like, we're not even, that's the thing. We're not even fighting the good fight anymore. We don't even feel like we're like fighting that much anymore. That's what's nice about it. Where the stigma lies the most deep nowadays, or in like is in Gen X is probably the worst. Because they're the ones that really grew up with Nancy Reagan and needing to hide it and feeling guilty about it and whatnot.
Yeah, well, not on this side of the Atlantic.
Right, yeah, right.
We don't
Right.
have that
So, well,
problem.
you've always been a bit, I feel like Europe's been a little bit more just kind of even keeled
Yeah, well,
about it.
you can't have it, so you either have it or you don't have it. So, and if you want to have it, then you got to do certain things to have it. And it's just the
Right.
way. Just it's one of those. You either know. I always go back to the Keysy thing. You're either on the bus or you're off the bus.
Right.
It's really that simple when it comes down to these things. I also wanted to raise the fact that a lot of medical cannabis environments in each state are forced upon the patients of those states by lobbyists and consultants who have enough money to persuade politicians there to put certain words through their legislature. And look, we've only got 10 minutes to go, but I mean, I don't know. What are your? I believe that's just purely wrong, and that whole system needs to be. You don't dump the existing medical regulations in each state, because probably be really hard to get them back again. But somehow the medical profession as a whole and the cannabis subset of it have to get more involved with the legislators to really make sure that there's a system that works for patients in each state.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't like, these are just discussions, and there's so much fodder for good conversation. I mean, just in Texas, they just turned down the law. Right. So Massachusetts overnight was hemp out of here. Got to be grown in the dispensary, sold in the dispensary. Everybody else, see ya. I mean, people's businesses they're out of business overnight. So in Texas, I guess they saved like 50 something thousand jobs by vetoing that
Yeah, well,
similar
he's vetoed
bill.
it, but
You said he vetoed it, but what happened?
he's gone back to the legislators and said, write me something a bit more friendly and I'll sign it, basically. So
Oh, is that true? Okay,
yeah.
that's yeah. I mean, even this hemp stuff, it's like the THC derived hemp, weight base. It's all shenanigans. It's all shenanigans, and I think that ultimately, it's good medicine. It's effective medicine. I've seen it work in thousands of patients. I've seen it, get people to sleep, get people to relax, get people to eat and gain weight. I've seen get people to forget about their pain for, like a few hours. So I think like ultimately it's kind of like that's that's what I hold on to, that it works.
Yeah, and time has told, and time and science will tell.